In the coldest place on Earth, an old woman hears a cry in the snow, and what she does next saves a cub's life. If you love animals and respect the strength of old age, subscribe to the channel. Now let's experience this powerful rescue story together. In the coldest place on Earth, where the wind can erase footprints in seconds and even the trees look like they're praying for mercy, there was a solitary log cabin standing alone in the Siberian tundra. People said nothing could survive out there for long, but people didn't know her. Her name was rarely spoken beyond the snow line because she lived so far from villages that even the maps gave up. She was an elderly native woman, small in size but built from a lifetime of endurance. The cold had carved lines into her face like rivers on stone. Her hands were rough, cracked, and strong, hands that had carried water, chopped wood, stitched fur, and buried memories. The cabin was old, poor, and stubborn like its owner. The wooden logs were worn smooth in places from years of storms. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, fur rugs covered the walls, and a cast-iron stove glowed orange when it could. The stove didn't just warm the room, it kept life from becoming a funeral. That night, the storm came like a threat. Not a normal storm. This one was violent, angry, and endless. Snow slapped the cabin like fists. Wind screamed through the cracks like a warning. Outside, the world turned into white chaos, and the horizon disappeared as if the earth had been erased. Inside, the woman sat near her window, staring into the blizzard. The glass rattled in its frame. Snow was piled so high outside that it looked like the storm was trying to seal her in alive. Her breath, even indoors, rose like smoke. She held a warm mug of tea between her palms. The steam rose, but the air was so cold it didn't travel far before fading. The kettle began to whistle softly, like a tiny bird trapped in metal. She listened to it, and she listened to the storm. But then she heard something that was not the kettle and not the wind. A sound so small it almost didn't exist. A faint cry. At first she thought her ears were lying. Old people sometimes hear things that aren't there, memories, ghosts of the past. But this was different. This sound had urgency. It had life inside it.
She set the mug down. Slowly she stood. Her joints creaked like old wood. She wrapped her scarf tighter, put on her thick mittens, and lifted a galvanized bucket from the floor. She didn't know what she was walking toward, only that something outside was calling. When she opened the cabin door, the storm exploded into the room. Snow rushed inside like an invading army. The wind tried to grab her scarf and drag her outward. The cold hit her face like a slap that could kill. But she stepped out anyway. Knee-deep snow swallowed her boots. The wind shoved her sideways. Her footsteps made a crunching sound beneath an icy crust, and in seconds the storm tried to cover her tracks as if she had never existed. She moved toward the edge of the cabin, trying to scoop clean snow into the bucket, snow that she could melt for water later. But the sound came again, a weak, struggling whimper. She froze, turned her head. Far away through the swirling white, she saw the dark suggestion of pine trees. The sound was coming from that direction. She tightened her grip on the bucket and began walking toward the tree line. Every step felt like walking through water made of ice. Snow whipped at her eyes. Her lashes caught flakes and turned them into tiny needles. The storm stole her breath, but she kept moving. Then she saw something on the ground. Tracks. Not human, small paw prints, partially filled with snow, but still fresh enough to be real. Her heart tightened. In this place, tracks usually meant danger. Wolves, foxes, bears, or something desperate. She followed the tracks.
A few steps later, she found a hollow in the snow, like a pit forming from a collapse beneath the surface. She peered down, and her breath caught. A tiger cub lay inside, tiny, half buried, shivering so hard its whole body trembled like a leaf in a hurricane. Its fur was wet and matted with ice, frost clung to its whiskers, its blue eyes were wide, terrified, begging for warmth. The cub tried to move, but it slipped back, too weak to climb, too cold to fight. The woman's bucket fell from her hands and disappeared into the snow with a dull thud. For a second, she simply stared. Out here, every choice was a calculation. If she stayed too long, she could freeze. If she went down into the pit, she could fall, hurt herself, never climb out. If she brought the cub home, it could become a danger later. But the cub was dying, and her heart, old and battered, still remembered what it meant to be helpless. She crouched down, her knees sinking into powder. Slowly she reached her mittened hand toward the cub, careful, patient, speaking softly as if her voice could fight the cold. The cub hissed weakly. It tried to show teeth, but it had no strength. The woman climbed into the pit awkwardly, snow sliding beneath her. She reached down and lifted the cub with both hands. It went limp in her arms. Not dead, but close. She pressed the cub against her chest and tucked it inside her fur coat, creating a pocket of warmth with her own body. Then she climbed out and ran. She ran back to the cabin like someone chasing life itself. She used her shoulders to block the wind from hitting the cub. She leaned forward through the storm. Her boots punched through the crust, slipping, catching, fighting. When she reached the cabin, she kicked the door shut behind her. And suddenly, the world became quiet. Not silent, because the fire still crackled, but quiet enough to hear breathing. Her breathing, and the cub's shallow, fragile breaths. She laid the cub on a sheepskin rug near the stove. The heat was gentle, but steady. The cub's fur was soaked and cold, and its tiny body felt wrong in her hands, too light, too fragile. She grabbed rough towels and thick blankets from a wooden chest and began rubbing the cub, hard, fast, creating friction, creating heat. The cub coughed, a tiny sound, then a whine. Its eyes opened slightly. Life. The woman's eyes softened. She added more logs to the stove. Sparks flew upward like fireflies. The room warmed. She wrapped the cub tightly in a thick wool blanket like a burrito, leaving its head exposed. The cub stared at the firelight, and for the first time, its eyes looked less afraid. She poured warm milk into a small bowl, dipped her finger in, and gently touched the cub's nose. The cub licked, slowly at first, then again. Then it drank more, messy, desperate, hungry for survival. The woman leaned back against the wall, exhausted, and she smiled, because in the coldest place on earth, kindness had just won a small battle against death. Days passed. The storm ended. Then another storm came, and another. Seasons moved like slow music. Winter loosened its grip, then returned again. The cabin remained, the woman remained, and the cub grew. At first, it was clumsy, chasing a ball of yarn across the floor like an oversized kitten. It stumbled, fell, rolled, then got up as if the world had forgiven it. The woman fed it fish when she could. She chopped raw fish on an old wooden board, fried it in a cast-iron pan, and laughed quietly when the young tiger tried to stand on its hind legs and beg like a child. As the tiger grew, its teeth grew too, but it never used them on her. It took food gently from her hand, like it understood something invisible. This hand had saved its life. At night, it slept on her bed, taking up half the space. Its breathing became a comforting sound in the cabin. The woman's loneliness, something she carried like a second coat, began to feel lighter. Spring came. Patches of green grass appeared around the cabin. Snow melted into streams. The tiger bounded through the grass like a living storm, chasing birds and leaves, pouncing on logs, showing the instincts it had been born with. And the woman watched from the porch, her heart filled with pride, and then sadness, because she could see what was coming. The tiger was becoming too big, too powerful. The cabin was too small, and the wild was calling. One evening, the tiger rested its massive head on her lap. It yawned, showing huge fangs, but its eyes were gentle, sleepy, trusting. The woman stroked the orange and black stripes slowly. Her wrinkled hand moved like a blessing, and she looked at the cabin walls. She looked at old memories. She realized love was not always holding on. Sometimes love was letting go. The next morning, she packed dried fish into a small bag. She opened the door wide. The tiger hesitated, looked at her, a long look, like it was memorizing her face. Then it stepped outside. She walked with it into the tiger forest, side by side, deep into the trees, past frozen branches and misty shadows. They reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The world was wide, too wide to own. The woman stopped, knees sinking into snow, and hugged the tiger's neck tightly. Her face pressed into its fur, and her breath shook. The tiger nuzzled her back, making a low, grumbling sound, its eyes closed. She pointed towards the deep forest, a quiet command. Go. The tiger walked a few steps, stopped, looked back one last time, then turned and ran, muscles rippling, disappearing into the trees and mist,